Hi everyone, and this is Dee Dryden, and welcome to Reflections of Faith. This is going to be a fun video because I want to make it fun. I am so happy that I'm going back to Montana. I'm thrilled. I even have my Montana shirt on. Check that out. My hair's gotten so long that I just there, right there. All right. I bought those when I was in Montana the last time. I left there and went there in 2006. I stayed there from 2006 to 2009. Absolutely fell in love with the place. And last video I did was about a girl that I met. Her, she had my first, middle, and last name. We met because we were both selling a vitamin. God saved her life within 45 minutes. That's a huge video. I want to go on to the next video, and that's what we're going to do. This is part 2 of Montana. What is it called? Reflection of my life. Right, God, that's what I'm going to call this, reflection of my life in Montana. Now I'm going to talk to you about the present. That was the present. Now I'm walking into my future, of course, because I'm going to Montana. So when I got, after this Deanne Dryden that was there, I met this person whose name was Robert, and he had a nickname, Butch. And it just so happened to be that that nickname, Butch, was the same nickname that my ex-husband had. And through a process of, I was doing in-home health care at the time, and when I was working for an agency, they had sent me to his house, and his wife was a Jehovah's Witness, and she was actually killing him. I'm going to make this video really fast because I don't know at what point the boys are going to be home, so I'm just going to whip right through it. And he was close to my age, and he was in a wheelchair. He was diagnosed with MS. And on the way home that night, after I had worked with him, the Spirit of the Lord just came on me, and I was just in tears for this person because I knew he was being persecuted in ways that he couldn't help himself. I think she was overdosing him with, she was doing with all the patches that they have that kills the pain. I can't remember what they're called, but morphine. Yeah, it was morphine, and he had little suckers that he was sucking on, and she was just giving him up because she wanted to take back. She was actually very greedy, and there was no pictures of him in the house. There were things that I noticed that God really wanted me to work with this person. So I reported her. He ended up getting out of that, going into a nursing home. I visited him in the nursing home, took him to a place where I was staying that had a wheelchair access with a fellow that I was doing in-home health care with it as well, and he agreed to that. So we brought him into the house to take care of him. Then I got him an apartment in Whitefish, and when we had went there, then I had took care of him because he couldn't take care of himself. So there had to be somebody there. So in that process, between 2006 and 2009, that's where I was working with him. And we went through a lot of, he gave his life to Christ, and when people get, when I worked in in-home health care, there were a lot of things that are root causes that causes a physical manifestation of a person who has either MS, cancer. With this particular person, anyway, I'm not going to generalize, he had layers and layers and layers and layers of things. I discovered that every time I peeled something off and he would repent for something, then some other spirit that would come up in him that would lash out. And again, he had MS, so it was affecting his brain and his thinking process. So keeping all of that in mind, we had up and down relationship. I was his caregiver, ended up falling in love with him. We were going to get married, but we couldn't go through I got to call this video my fake marriage, because you're going to understand what I'm talking about. But I think through this process, you're going to understand what God was doing through this whole thing. I am called to become a healer because I spent 20-some years seeing all my life actually, seeing all kinds of different bondages that people get into. So I'm literally an expert at it, as well as walking through some of it. So I'm just going to, having said that, I'm going to tell you this. he wasn't walking, and I got him to walking. He would take a walker, walk out to his car. We also got him in physical therapy. This was the person that God wrapped his, whole heart over. He did so many miracles for him. I think when the verse says, a man that finds a woman as his wife is shown favor and blessed, that definitely was that. And God was all for him, but he just would not, after those layers and layers and layers would come out, there would be another one and another one and another one. And it got to be where I physically could not take care of him. But I want to explain this little story that is, well, now it's funny. At the time it wasn't, but I ended up falling in love with him because he had a way of manipulating a woman to get what he wanted. So he would say anything that he, complimenting me to get me to do what he wanted me to do. And of course, in that position of where I was, and without my family, and without, miles and miles away, I was in a very vulnerable position. And as his caregiver living in his house, that relationship then became a little closer and a little closer. But I didn't want to have sex before marriage, so I wanted to get married. Well, when we went to go through the state to do that, they were going to take away all his medical care. And I'm going to stop this for just once. All his medical benefits. So we had talked to a pastor. We had went in and talked to a pastor about doing it outside of having to go through the court system. And a real funny, I had 3 people in this process. My mentor tell me that was not biblical. I had a friend that was a pastor, a single pastor, who had called me up one day when I was in a park and I was just upset about this something or another, and he also told me that it wasn't biblical. And the pastor that we lined up to do this, the last minute we had gotten, this was so funny because I had a reception ready, and we were going to do it in the place where we were living. We invited the neighbors. Both of my sons came to do this and to do this wedding. But at the last minute, the day before, the pastor backed out, and I had I thought there was an understanding that we were going to do this without the court system, that we wouldn't have to go through the court. And I had heard people who had done this, and so of course my feelings and my emotions were all involved in the whole process. So what had happened in the last minute, and this is funny because my youngest son really, kids me about this. My oldest son played the pastor, and the pastor had given us a thing that we had this, how to do it. And my youngest son kids me. He says, "You're still married to that person because I couldn't be your fake lawyer because my brother was your fake, pastor that married you." So I call that my fake marriage. And come to find out, after that whole experience, I ran into other people that were doing that were in a fake marriage. Because what it's about is sex and money. It really isn't about, in love there has to be a sacrifice. And there was no sacrifice there. So the sacrifice, like God died on the cross, there has to be, love is a sacrifice. Because Christ died for us, he sacrificed his life for us. That in and of itself was true love. But when your emotions get all in the way and you're in a place, so we went through this fake marriage, and everybody went home and everybody congratulated us. So having been married, or thought we were married, we consummated this marriage. And let me tell you, did that open the windows of heaven? The windows of hell. Because this person became a totally different person, and for a week it was just horrible. I mean, we both changed. There was, it just gave the keys to hell to Satan, and he just had a heyday with our relationship. And so we decided that we would fast and pray, and this was so funny because I didn't want to have sex. I wanted to go back to where we were because I knew that this was wrong. Well, he didn't want to do that because he had gotten what he wanted. So in the process, I said, well, let's ask God to prove who is right and who is wrong, and I'm going to let you make the confirmation. So I said to him, so he said to me, we had a next door neighbor that was like 45, but he had like a 10-year-old mentality. And he said, well, if the next door neighbor goes to town with us, and we'll just call him John. John comes to town with us today, that'll be my first confirmation. But I want 3 confirmations, he said. And I wanted to fast for 40 days because I really wanted to search God. Because, like I said, all hell broke loose. So, but he didn't want to do that. To him, he was married and we were done, and that was the end of that. But I knew that we had done something very, very wrong. But he had finally agreed, and he said, okay, well, if I'll fast with you 40 days and search God about this, if the next door neighbor comes to us to Kalispell, and we were about 30 miles out tomorrow, and we don't ask him. And the second thing I want to see confirmation about is 40. He's got to mention 40 at least twice in the process. If he does even decide to go with us, or he goes with us by some chance, on the way there, he's got to say the number 40 twice. That way I know that God wants us to do a 40-day fast to see that this is not his will. So he made it very complicated. This Robert made it very complicated. So I thought, I knew this wasn't God's will, and I didn't know how God was going to rearrange it, but we were going to see. So on the way to Kalispell, or the next morning, of course, this John comes over. He doesn't have any idea that we're leaving and going to Kalispell. He just comes over and he says, are you going to Kalispell today? Because I need to get some things done. And I looked at Robert, and Robert told me that I could not say the number 40. Neither one of us could say that number and the whole process. So he got in the car, and of course we invited him because that was part of the confirmation. So on the way there, this John says to us, I'm going to be 40 tomorrow, and so is my twin. She's going to be 42. And you could hear a pin drop in that car. God came through. We looked at each other, and so he then conceded to doing a 40-day fast to see whether or not that this was not of God. So we spent the first week not having sex, and there was a peace that immediately came over that relationship. God was all over that. And but his flesh, because he wasn't truly committed to God, did not want to do that. We did not want to go 40 days and do that. God immediately answered him. Excuse me, he immediately put us in a 40-day fast, and that first week was just peace. It was shortly after that one evening, excuse me, he came undone or unglued or whatever it was, and we had excuse me, I'm going to stop this for just a second. So he had during this time that we had done this, he knew that God did not want us having sex, and we wanted to do it legally, but he couldn't even fathom losing that money because that was his only resource. And of course he had fear all over him because of the MS, and that's how that got in the whole process. And it's complimenting people to get them to do something to you in order to have sex is a form of witchcraft. And so he had it really steep in him. He needed some kind of deliverance that manifested itself into MS. And so the week that peace just came on us, he just agreed that that was it, but he didn't want to spend 40 days not having sex because his flesh, of course, in his eyes, he was married. So after the first week had gone by, we had like 8 foot of snow, and we had a storm like you wouldn't believe, and he had kicked me out of his house. And unfortunately, I had packed everything up. God came through. A tow truck came through the next day, cleared the way. I packed all my things, and I came home in 2009. And I asked God to clear a way for me and to have sun shining all the way home. And I'll tell you, that was such an amazing storm. And of course, my mentor, who lives up there, she knew all about that. Now, that was my present. After I had come home, then a couple of years ago, we discovered that Butch, my ex-husband, did have a terminal disease of cancer. And I spent 2 years then walking the sons and him through that. And so that represented my present. But now I'm walking into my future, and I'll go into that in my next video. But it's very interesting how God turned me around at that whole trip in Montana to see excuse me, my life and my reflection of my life through other people. And he just created this story that was my past, present, and now I'm walking into my future. And that will be my third video on this. So please stay tuned, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you want to hear part 3. And I probably won't do that until I get to Montana, or when I have a chance again to be alone with you to just express what I'm trying to tell you. And these are all written in journals. You know, there's more detail to all of this that I'm going to put in the book. So the name Robert has been very prominent in my life for some reason. When Deanne Dryden and this Robert had met, I always thought that they should be together. And I had remembered saying one time, Lord, where is my Robert? You know, that I am yoked with, because these two people were actually yoked. They were in the same level of belief and the whole process. And so it was very interesting past. It's a very, very interesting past, to say the least. But, you know, the fake marriage thing. I ended up running into somebody who actually was from Scotts Bluff or somewhere. I think it was Pierre. He was down here for a Christian concert, and he was doing that same thing. He was married to a lady who, he wasn't married, he had a fake marriage, what I call fake marriages. And so did a relative of mine. She went through this whole process not to lose her money and her. So, but in reality, those fake marriages, there's no sacrifice. It's all about money, and it's all about sex and companionship. But I don't believe that it's true love, because there's no sacrifice that you're making. And God really pointed that out to me in the process of counseling people who go through the same thing. Because true love, there has to be a sacrifice of some kind, and of course guided by God. And that didn't happen. And I think that when people do that sacrifice, they get blessed in the process. And so I had discovered along the way there are other people out there that are doing that same thing. So if you are, I'm telling you that that's not biblical. I walked it, and I've seen people go through so much tribulation when they're not legally married, because he put the authority over us for a reason, be it authority that we may not want, we still bless. So having said that, thanks for joining me on Reflections of Faith, and be blessed to be a blessing, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Thanks.